I was expecting the long intro of how we're great friends and how he's looking forward to this. And I'm just joking. Um, I've mentioned this to you guys before, but I love worshiping with you guys. Isn't it amazing that we have a God that allows us to enter into his presence? We kind of take that for granted. We come in and we're like, give me the cool songs and I want to sing this. But if you pay attention to what we're singing and that we have a resting place and a shelter in his presence, that's amazing. And that's worth pausing and thinking about and praising him for. So we started a series last week on silence and solitude. And Scott mentioned how we're looking at Elijah. And so today we're going to pick up in chapter 18. And we're going to walk through this entire story. So the guys in the back that are going to do the slides up here, that keyboard's going to be smoking because they're going to be flying through all these verses. And so open up to 1 Kings 18 if you have that with you, if you have an app. I believe I have the NIV here that we'll be reading from. Basically, this morning, I just want us to walk through this story together. And I'm going to do my best to be completely honest with you guys. There's a few things that I noticed in this story that I had never noticed before. God does that sometimes, right? A familiar story that most of us have probably heard before. You've probably heard a sermon before. Honestly, this is one of the stories that a lot of people get excited about when they read or when they teach. And I was there. That's exactly where I was. But when I got into it, there's a few things that just kind of popped out that I'm going to draw your attention to. And again, like I said, I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm not pretending to have this all figured out. Similar to how Scott mentioned, none of us are experts in silence and solitude. We don't consider ourselves spiritual directors, that's what we do is help people do this. But we also know the importance and the value of this, and we want this to be one of the rhythms that we pick up on this summer. So by the end of this series, we want you to be more confident with approaching God and his presence and having significant times of silence and solitude where you can completely focus on him. So Elijah, we know, is a prophet of God, and he's coming up against Ahab, the king, the guy that's in charge. And so we see this encounter here in 1 Kings 18. I'm going to start in verse 17 if I can. So 1 Kings 18, verse 17. It says, when Ahab saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied. "But you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two options? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." So we see these two groups set up here between the prophets of Baal who have Ahab and Jezebel with them, and then you have Elijah coming up against them. But what was interesting to me is we see these two groups, and we instantly, our minds just kind of focus, say, well, yeah, we're going to be on Elijah's side here because we know who he is. We're reading about his story here. But notice who Elijah's talking to. He says, "Send word throughout all of Israel to assemble these prophets and let's meet up on Mount Carmel." Elijah's talking to everybody, to all people, to the people of God, to the people of Israel, those that were rescued and delivered up out of Egypt, those that God's presence has shown with them. He's saying, assemble all these people and let's meet up on Mount Carmel. And then he says, how long will you waver between these two options? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. How long will you waver? This idea of wavering is kind of like limping. How long will you limp along? The Net Bible says, "How long will you be paralyzed by indecision?" Israel is in a place where they're wanting it both ways. They're kind of wanting to play both sides. And Elijah just brings them to a point of decision that says, if Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, if that's the one that you want to worship, follow Baal. Follow him. And then here's the verse that I kind of paused and I spent some time with there in down in verse 21, 22 maybe. So Elijah poses this question and he says, "But the people said nothing." We quickly know, okay, Elijah, God, Yahweh, that's the right side. Ahab, Baal, these prophets, that's the wrong side. But Elijah's speaking to all the people saying, you get to choose. If you want to worship Yahweh or worship Baal, you decide. Quit limping along. And the people said nothing. This is not the kind of silence that this series is about. This is not the kind of silence that we're kind of promoting with the Silence and Solitude series. And honestly, this kind of confuses me a little bit. Why in the world would the people, would all of Israel, not a single person jump up and say, "Yo, I'm going to go with this Yahweh guy. I'm going to follow him"? The people, all the people said nothing. There's a little bit on this Canaanite religion of Baalism and what it was about that I can think help us just a little bit. I don't think it gets the people off the hook, but Walter Brueggemann says, Baalism is a socio-religious system rooted in the capacity to secure life for self by the manipulation and the control of the gifts of the Creator. It's a self-centered management that eventually leads to an anti-neighbor ethic. So it's a way for these people to manipulate the things of God, the things that he's created, in order for them to be in control. At this point in the story, it has not rained for 3.5 years. They're right in the middle of a drought, which those that grow their own food, that dependent upon crops for survival, that's kind of a big deal. They needed rain in order to survive, and it hadn't rained in 3.5 years. They're right in the middle of a drought. So it makes sense that maybe they want to take control of the situation. Maybe they want to secure life and start to manage themselves, and so they turn to Baal, the god of rain. Many at this point were probably really worshiping Baal. They believed that he was God, that he was going to provide this rain for them. And so Elijah comes up and is like, okay, you need to decide, Yahweh or Baal. And the people said nothing. They didn't want to give up control. They didn't want to depend upon something outside of what they were so in charge of. And so the question, are we that different? We all want a secure life, right? A good life. We want to manage ourselves. Sometimes we feel like we've got to get all this stuff in order, and we've got to figure out some things of life, and then we can spend time with God. Let me see how I can fit this silence into my calendar. There's a few other ways that we like to be in control. Oftentimes we have made our time with the Lord and our time with reading Scripture something that we just check off a box. Like, okay, I've got that done. Now I'm going to spend 99.9% of my time with the rest of the things I'm in charge of. Sometimes we look to our bank accounts as what's in control. We trust our financial plans, our financial planner. We trust our checking account balance. Sometimes we make responsible decisions. We weigh out all the options and we do the right thing, maybe if we know that that's not where the gospel is pushing us toward. We have a variety of tools and calendars and to-do lists and reminders and phone alarms and schedules and things beeping at us and clicking at us and popping up and flashing to remind us, hey, you've got stuff you need to be doing. You went over on this line item. Your heart rate's too high. Your blood pressure's too low. You've got too much things to do. You got to get busy. Move. Because our lives are something that we control, and we desire to take control. Our country as a whole is not that different. Again, I don't want to be too political here, but we want to control our borders. We want to control our carbon footprint. We want to control our environment. We want to control water rights. We're going to determine who gets to use what water for what. We're going to spend a lot of times cleaning the ocean and cleaning out all this plastic. We're going to GMO our crops and spray it with all kinds of stuff so that it grows and the bugs don't. And so these are all just little bitty examples of how we are in charge and we are in control, especially of stuff like our crops. That's kind of relevant right now with the fact that a lot of farmers missed their deadline to be able to plant this year because of the rain. And so what are they going to do? Who are they turning to right now? Again, Walter Brueggemann, in his comment on this passage, says it a little bit more blatantly and bluntly than I can. He says, think about medical research and this potential for military devastation that we embrace, this industrial revolution that's destroyed our ecosystem, the cheapening of lives for those that are not productive. All suggest that this same contest that we see in 1 Kings 18 is still very much part of the decisions that we're making today. How are we supposed to really treat those around us? Who's really in control? Ruth Haley Barton in chapter 3 talks about the resistance to silence and solitude. And she says sometimes, even when we know and we schedule and we plan this time where we're going to spend in silence and in solitude to where we're going to just really focus on the Lord and spend time with Him, there's a resistance. There's a fear that, no, I can't do that. I got too much going on. Too much is at stake. I've got too many other things I got to spend my time doing. I cannot spend time in silence and solitude with the Lord. There's a fear of not knowing what God's really going to do during that time. That's because it's a time where we're not in control. We're saying, God, you're more important than anything else I've got going on. And so I don't have any requests I'm bringing to you. There's nothing I'm trying to get out of you. I just want to be with you. I want you to be with me. All of our concerns and all of our fears of spending any kind of resistance in silence and solitude is just attempts that we are trying to maintain, to be in control and maintain the control of the situation. And so Elijah, 1 Kings 18, verse 22, he said to them, after they said nothing, he said, I'm the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets, not to mention the other 400 that he already brought up. He said, get 2 bulls for us, and let's let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let's cut them into pieces and put them on the wood, but not set it on fire. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire, because He is God. And then the people said, they decided to chime in on this one. They're going to actually speak up. They're like, what you say is good. That sounds good to us. That's fair. We're at a point where we're not quite sure who we're going to worship, God or Baal. We know we need some water. You want to do some sacrifice stuff with a couple of bulls? Let's go for it. Sounds good to us. Let's try to figure this out. As if all the people of Israel don't know who God really is, right? That's kind of how we're thinking about it. Like, oh yeah, we don't know. Verse 25, Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls, prepare it first. Since there are so many of you, call on the name of your God. but do not let fire to it. So they took the bull, gave it to them, and they prepared it. It says, they called in the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And so they danced around the altar that they had made. And at noon, Elijah jumps up and begins to taunt them. He's like, maybe you need to shout louder. Surely he's God. Maybe he's deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and you need to wake him up. This is one of the things I like about Elijah, because he's getting completely sarcastic with him, right? You know, all of us sarcastic people are like, amen, Elijah. Thank you for jumping in there. He's being really offensive. He's definitely irritating him. Maybe Baal's busy. Maybe he stepped out. It's insulting. It's kind of like maybe Baal went outside and he's out in the porta potty, you know? They had to have food trucks at this thing, right? There's so many people there, right? So he begins taunting them. So they did what he said, verse 28. So they shouted louder, and then they start slashing themselves with swords and spears, because that was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed. They continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. So now clearly it's time for this bull to be sacrificed, but there was no response, it says. No one answered. No one paid attention. Again, it's almost just as powerful as the people being quiet. No answer, no response in verse 26. No voice, no answer, no response in 29. Clearly, Baal is absent, indifferent, silent, unresponsive, uncaring, unwilling to answer. And so now all these people are abandoned. They're on their own. No one paid attention. No one answered. For us, this makes sense because we know that Baal is not real. He's a made-up god, made up by the people in order for them to maintain their control, in order for them to be in charge. They're like, oh, we worship Baal, the god of rain. We can do whatever we want. Elijah continues in verse 30. Elijah said again to all the people, come here to me now. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar to the Lord, in the name of the Lord. And he dug a trench around large enough to hold about 50 pounds of seed. And he arranged the wood, and he cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, I want you to fill 4 large jugs with water and pour it all over this offering and onto the wood. Verse 34, do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a third time, he ordered, and they did it a third time. So they've got 12 large jars of water that they've completely soaked and drenched the offering and the trench and the seed, and it's completely soaking wet. It says water ran down around the altar and filled the trench. The bull that they laid on the altar, we know from looking at the entire Old Testament, it was going to be a sacrifice. It was when you sacrifice this animal, it represented the people as saying, okay, I'm laying down, just as the bull lays on the altar is to be sacrificed, I'm laying down my life. And so here, there's going to be a sacrifice on behalf of the people. This is reinforced by the 12 stones representing the 12 tribes, the people of God that we know. It's the same 12 tribes that are going to be gathered around worshiping the throne in Revelation. So here, this is a picture of saying, these are all of you guys are represented here. Even in your silence, even though you didn't jump up and say anything, we're gonna issue this sacrifice on your behalf. Soak up this offering with water. We're reminded that it hadn't rained in 3.5 years. 12 large jars of water is incredibly valuable at this time. I'm not even sure where they got this water, and they're pouring it onto the altar among a thirsty people in a thirsty country. Do it again a second time. Do it again a third time. In verse 36, at the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I'm your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. And so we have to assume that Elijah is putting it all on the line here. He has to know that if God doesn't do anything, he's probably the one that's going to be killed. He's done if nothing happens. If nothing happens, the people can just maintain their indifference toward God. They can just keep trying to control the situation, and they're going to have to figure something else out. But, verse 38, after Elijah prayed, it said, Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and it licked up the water from the trench. So it wasn't just like a poof. It was fire came in and consumed this completely drenched offering that Elijah had prepared. It said, when the people saw this, they fell down prostrate and they cried, The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Yahweh is God. The Lord is God. The Lord is God. Again, the people, they go from being completely quiet to, okay, let's set that up. That sounds good, to, oh my goodness, God just showed up. Clearly, He is the Lord. He is God. It's been said that this is kind of the pinnacle. This is kind of the apex of Elijah. This is the story that people think of when they think of Elijah. And I think there is an incredible amount of trust that he's showing as he's praying to God, saying, I'm being obedient to you. I'm your servant. I want you to show up among these people. And then boom, he does. The people break their silence because the Lord is God. At this point, they've decided who to trust because the Lord is God. They've decided who really is in control because the Lord is God. And so I think for us, thinking back in verse 21 where Elijah said, if the Lord's God, follow Him. But if Baal's God, follow him. Moving down to verse 39 where we're saying, okay, the Lord, He is God. Let's follow Him. As we move to practicing silence and solitude, we don't do it to control God. We don't do it to manipulate God. It's not like, okay, I'm facing this time of indecision. Let me spend some time in silence and solitude so that God will do something. Versus, I'm going to spend some time in silence and solitude, and I'm going to let God be God. I'm going to let Him do whatever He wants to do. We practice silence to hear afresh the call to follow Jesus. And as followers of Christ, those of us that have confessed and put our faith and our trust in Him and our allegiance in Him, and we are following Jesus, we have to learn from Him. We have to acknowledge and know that by His Spirit He's with us, His presence is present, and that we're following Him completely and utterly dependent upon Him in every single area of our lives. We have to learn from Him. We have to give Him control and give up controlling ourselves. And so we've done something similar like this before, but what I'd like for us to do is I'd like for us to have a quick time of prayer. So whatever you need to do to just kind of close your eyes, focus your hearts on the presence of the Lord again. Try to clear away any distractions that might be present now. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about what are the things that you're trying to do to control in your life. And I want you to just kind of using your imagination, just begin to collect those in your hand. List off a few things. Maybe you need to use both hands to just acknowledge all the things that you're doing to try to be in control. Maybe you need to clench your fist. Make a fist that just kind of represents that, these are the ways that I'm controlling. These are the things that the fears that I'm have. These are the distractions. These are the things that I'm trying to do to be in charge of. My family, my friends, my job, my status, my bank account. And just simply acknowledging that God's in control. I just want you to open your hand and let those go. Maybe you need to do that a few times. Just be honest with God, the Lord. Maybe you could benefit from the image that Scott used last week of leaves and sticks at the riverbank that are just kind of flowing along. Just let them flow down the stream. Just let them go. Maybe you need to throw some rocks in the creek and let those drop to the bottom. This week, as we're practicing silence and solitude, the Lord's going to give us opportunities to just let these distractions go. We're going to have opportunities to give up control of some things as we trust God, as we continue to depend upon Him, as we confess that He is the Lord, that He is God. Father, we're thankful that we get to worship You. You are the God that accepts our sacrifice. You're the God that showed up on Mount Carmel and completely consumed this offering on behalf of You and Your people. And Father, we're thankful that we know You. We confess that we are Your people and You are our God. Father, there's also ways that we still try to maintain control of ourselves. There's ways that we're still trying to manage our lives, and there's several things that we still trust in apart from You. And so, Father, we just confess that we give up. We relinquish that control. We want You to be God in all areas of our lives. We want to trust You and depend upon You. Father, we give You all of our fears and all of our distractions. Give us more opportunities this week to completely depend upon You. We give up control because You are God, and we trust You with all things.